Hello, welcome listeners to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. A lot of my podcasts start with communication from somebody who'd like to consider being on the podcast, and I got an email about a month ago from Stephen Mark Trier, and he said, I am an excommunicated gay Mormon. I've written a book, and I'm hoping it would be worthy of listing on your website. And as I read Stephen's book a little bit and process this email a little bit, I thought, well, why don't we get Stephen on the podcast? He can tell us his full story as an excommunicated gay Mormon. And so here we are now recording this podcast. I don't think Stephen thought I would ask him to be on the podcast, but I felt impressed to do that. As you know, regular listeners, we try to share stories of lots of LGBTQ Latter-day Saints walking different roads, and I've learned to love and support my friends that are no longer in the church, or even those that are excommunicated, and just see us as the same human family. And also recognize I can probably learn some things from Stephen. He's 58. So he was excommunicated in 1992. That's, nearly 34 years ago, if I did that math correctly. He's a composer and a producer. He grew up in the Bay Area. He's adopted. And he now lives with his birth mother in Montana, along with his partner, and they've been together 8 years. We said a prayer before we started. As I visited with Stephen for the last 10, 20 minutes, this is a good man who's walked an incredibly complicated road and has learned really important principles and turned to really good resources to help him navigate a road that when he came out as gay, in the 90s, there was just far less resources. And one of our guests, Greg Prince, has been talking about how the church went from the behavior model, this is a choice, to the biological model mostly. Most leaders, I think, generally believe that, and Stephen wasn't part of that world. He was part of the behavior model, that Stephen made a choice to be gay. This is a choice, he can unchoose it, and he had to navigate that, knowing he couldn't do anything to change his sexual orientation. So he's going to share his story, and I'm just so honored to have him on the story. His last name is spelled Trier. Trier is how we say and spell his last name. Is that okay, my friend Stephen, for an introduction?
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
So you are up. Just go ahead and share. It's like we're going out to lunch, and you're going to share your story with me and all the listeners.
Okay. Well, like you mentioned, I was adopted. I was the product of a teenage girl who had, gone wayward, and it was her first love, and she got pregnant with me, and so typical of those days, they would send girls off to school, and what that really meant was that they would they would have their child, and then it would be put up for adoption within the Mormon framework. So my birth family was Mormon, and then the adopted family was also Mormon. Um, I was adopted at 3 weeks old, born in Southern California, but raised up in Northern California in Santa Rosa. My father was an executive for a large technology corporation, and was eagerly climbing the ladder at the church as well, and had become a stake president. He was a stake president for as long as I could remember. Um, anyway, his his household was run differently than he ran his religion. In other words, who he was at home was a very different person than what he presented to the public. He was, I don't know if he had the narcissistic, personality disorder, but I know that he certainly exhibited a lot of those traits. And um, the difficulty I had with him, there was I don't want to get too much into it, but it was abusive physically and mentally, and I just found myself constantly um, struggling with trying to communicate with him, trying to help him understand me. The only times that seemed like I would ever see him would be after work when he'd come back home, and I'd run into my room and was terrified because, I mean, he really was the monster under my bed. There was nothing I feared more than him. And when I would come to church, and the bishop at the time, who was a licensed psychiatrist, would see me with a black eye or a bloody lip or whatever. He'd bring me into his office and ask me if my dad did that. And I said, well, you know, he did. And I knew that he was bound by the state to report it, but he says, well, I can't really do anything for you, but because I work for your dad, but if you ever need to talk, my office is always open. And I knew then that, basically my father could kill me and he'd get away with it. Um, there was no culpability. There was nobody to check him on how he lived his life in accordance with the gospel. So it was difficult for me to reconcile those two people, but I loved both those and respected both those people. It was just, I constantly was reaching out to him, and I felt like he wasn't quite hearing me. I was a classically trained pianist. I was a state champion by 8 years old. I had started at age 3, and so that was my outlet. There in piano competitions, there would always be the comments by the judges that how can he play with such feeling, and I would kind of laugh inside because they had no idea that I was pouring my emotion from the relationship with my father into the music. Um, so they thought that it was my teacher who was the amazing one. Um, I uh, I really enjoyed the time I could spend with my dad. He would sometimes drag me up to play piano somewhere in the different parts of his region, and I enjoyed that because I could spend time talking to him in the car, picking his brain, picking his brain, and figuring him out a little bit more. Um, so I knew it by age 6 I was gay. I didn't know what the word gay meant, but I knew that I was attracted to boys, and I wanted to sit next to the cute boy, and when the teacher was reading to us, I mean, it came as naturally as anything. Um, although at the time, like you'd mentioned, the behavior model, um, it was versus the biological model. Truly, we were taught that being gay was second only to murder and abortion, and yet I knew I hadn't chosen this. This is not something that you just elect, and it's certainly not something you savvy into. It's, I had a wonderful psychiatrist on my mission, and she helped me to understand um, myself better and also to embrace who I was. Um, she was really an amazing person. And I went on my mission thinking it would make me straight. I tried it. I mean, I literally thought of everything, including castration, whether I didn't know it was chemical at the time, but I thought whatever I had to do to get this out of me would be worth it, and then I could possibly be happy. So the last ditch effort was to go on my mission, thinking that the Lord would make me straight, even if it was the last day, as long as I completed my mission. Um, I was diagnosed manic depressive bipolar dyslexic on my mission by the same psychiatrist that I mentioned before. And I really believe that, that's what they call a dystonic state of being. I wasn't happy with myself. I wasn't, things weren't functioning right because I was in a closet. Once I embraced who I was, I became syntonic, or if things flowed naturally, and I was definitely much happier because I was being honest. My father had counseled me once that I would not be happy until I was honest with myself, and I said, "Well, Dad, I'm gay," and he goes, "Well, I don't mean that honest." And so then I realized that okay, there's varying degrees of, of honesty, and I don't remember learning that growing up in the church. Um, uh, I, I I loved my time in the church. I loved the music. I loved the performance. I loved being part of any activity in the church. It was all consuming, and that was fine with me. The difficulty came when I came out. I Some of those same people that loved me growing up, I had a falling out with, or they didn't want to, you know. continue any kind of communication with me. That was difficult, but I had stood on my own since I was very, very young. I knew what my dad was all about and knew the dynamics of the relationship with him very clearly. I knew that I wasn't his child. I was adopted. I was a means to an end. As soon as they had adopted me, then my adopted mother became pregnant with my younger sister. So that was the whole point, was that was back in those days they would have the mother adopt a child, and then it would trick them psychosomatically somehow to become fertile. And my mother didn't marry my father because she loved him. She married him because he would be a good provider. That's a whole different whole different era. You either missed the sexual revolution or you nailed it. And the problem is that they kind of missed it, but they bought into the whole Nixonian, corporation of America thing. And that was you found a mate based on whether they'd be um, um, a good partner in provider in those days. So that was a whole that's a whole other thing. So anyway, I never felt like I had to struggle with expressing myself to my mother. She kind of got me. She was Lutheran. She was raised Lutheran and became Mormon. So and since my father has died, she's kind of gravitated back to that the Lutheran state of mind, and um, has really blossomed and come into her own. She and I were kind of vying for best victim of my father growing up. And you can't have two queens in a house. And I just realized that she was always going to win, and that's fine. I tried to reach out to her on Mother's Day. I would write a song or a poem. I would give a talk in church. And I always outdid my dad when it came to giving her flowers or any gifts. Um, that was something I enjoyed doing, because I was trying to teach him how to love her, and how you don't give her a vacuum for her birthday. It's not, you gotta, it's not, that just isn't enough. I The year that he gave her a vacuum, I gave her a Waterford punch bowl. I love being the thorn in my dad's side. I really enjoyed it. I don't know. I think it's because it was the only way I sparred with anybody. But it was kind of a dangerous game, because I also knew that there was no one I feared more than my dad. And I the abuse had gotten to a point where I tried to poison him. I almost burnt the house down. There were all sorts of things going on. Um, the difficulty was that I started to realize that I was expressing signs of real concern about my behavior. At the time, I was in junior high, and the whole Jeffrey Dahmer case had opened up, and I was listening to it as I walked home. And I realized, gosh, this guy had a lot of the same background as I do, and he was abused as well. And then he started to exhibit some of the same behaviors that I was. And I realized I don't want to be this guy. That's not who I am. Who I am is loving, and I want to be that person. So I realized I needed to be long suffering and patient and kind. So I just needed to survive him and get out of his house, and then I'd be okay. Um, I had I don't know why, but a Native American sort of spirit guide came to me when I was a kid that just said, never let him break your spirit. And I remembered that my whole life. And I knew that my birth mother was out there, and I knew she loved me unconditionally, and that someday I would meet her. And I made a deal with the universe. I just said, if I go through all this, and I am a loving and long suffering, patient, kind person, then I get to meet my birth mother, and I want it to be on television. Not only partially because I'm a media whore from Los Angeles, but more importantly, I wanted others to be able to see my story and be inspired to find their families, their birth families. And I'm happy to say that my cousin and my older sister Carol both reunited with their birth families. So there was a this is it's on my YouTube channel. It's called The Message, Um, but I did end up meeting my birth mother about 20 years ago now, and it's completely changed my life. She At age 35, she gave me the very thing I needed, which was unconditional love. And I realized at first I needed her approval for things, but then, as it naturally does for others, you then only need your own approval, and you gain autonomy that way. But I never had that my whole life. I never had a sense of value for just being alive. I was often told that I would never amount to anything, um, and then at the same time, from that same person, she would tell me, "Well, of all the kids, you stand to make the most money." And I said, "Well, now wait a minute. Why would you say that?" She said, "Because you'll never stop until you get what you want." And I realized that that was really true. I was belligerently myself, and so part of my coming out process was um, figuring out what gay meant to me. I mean, I would watch the gay pride on television, and I'd be like, see them trolling batons and wearing, tight lemay shorts, and I'm like, well, if that's gay, that's not me. I couldn't relate to that, and so when I finally did move down to San Francisco, I worked for a law firm, and it was Morrison and Forster, and we were known as the mofo homos. But we were just normal people that just wanted to have normal lives and relationships, and um, I could relate to that. When Will and Grace came out, I definitely, that was my go-to for, yeah, this, we're normal. We're just want to be like anybody else, and have families, and just be a part of society. So it's figuring out where I fit into that. Um, I and when I finally did come out, I was never more happy. I could hold a job for longer than 6 months, and I wrestled with that in conversation with my dad. He continued to pursue me and call my employers, and try to get me fired, even though I wasn't in his house anymore. And I found that puzzling, but challenged all the time. And eventually, uh, I stopped having kind of a relationship with them for my own sake. I needed to pull back. And the only thing I could pull back was myself and spending time with them. I would be invited for Christmas to play the piano, and they loved all of that. But I realized that, by doing that, I was selling a little bit of myself, and that was that buying into that whole childhood wanting parents' approval versus demanding respect. And for me, that was paramount, was to put boundaries and have self-respect. Practice that. I didn't understand what it meant when I'd hear people say, "Oh, well, you have to be your own best friend." And I always thought that was weird. What do you mean by that? I didn't get it. Um, and I certainly didn't understand what it meant to love yourself. I thought that was narcissism. I interpreted it that way. However, through different experiences, I realized that, just little baby steps of practicing kindness towards myself by not allowing others who would, manipulate me or try to get something out of me, exploit me. Just little steps like that made me feel better. I felt better. Um, so anyway, it took me a while to uh, work on the shortcomings in my personality. I realized I had inherited a lot of the same narcissistic traits that my father had. We tend to recreate that which is familiar to us in our relationships, and in whether it's work or personal relationships. I realized that I didn't want to have those traits. So I set out to fundamentally shift who I was. I mean, I had 7 boyfriends that all left me for the same reason. Well, maybe there were different reasons, but certainly the one common denominator was me. So I realized I needed to do some real personal management, and um, reestablish more healthy um, parts of my personality, shift my thinking, shift. I've always felt like the more you evolve and allow yourself to evolve, the more alive you are. And that's when age becomes nothing but a number. As long as I'm challenged and allow myself to be challenged and actually seriously consider other people's opinions, other people's positions on things, and truly investigate what was true for me. And honestly, the choices that I have made in my life, I have come to find out that the uh, I would always consider what it would be like for everybody on different outcomes if I made a different choice, how it would play out. And eventually, I'd always end up with the one that was the most difficult choice to make, the one that truly was the most difficult for me to accept. That's the one to choose every time because I would inevitably I'd end up there anyway. So I would just go ahead and automatically default to that. And then I would learn faster and learn harder. And I would make exponential progress versus I didn't know how long I was going to live, so the more I could learn, the better. And I considered every source. I didn't consider just the church or just what I had experienced at that point. I solicited opinions from everybody. I think it's important to search for truth no matter where it comes from, and I try not to have a filter. Of whether this person's telling me the truth or not. It's whatever I can glean from it, whatever resonates with me as truth, then I, then I'll accept that. And if it's I know I never ascribe to one way of living. I don't. I certainly not what you would call religious anymore. And I miss the church for that. I miss the social aspects of the church. I miss the music a lot. I used to play at least probably about four church meetings. I'd play the organ at the Mormon church, and something that would be much to the chagrin of my father. I would play two masses in the morning at the Catholic church, and they'd pay me $100, and my dad would ask me, "Well, where were you this morning?" And I said, "I was playing at the Catholic church," and he's like, "Ugh." So angry about that, and I enjoyed it because it was a different environment. It was a different, a different way to worship. Certainly, the music is similar, but it was and there's a lot more pomp and circumstance, I suppose, in the Catholic Church. But and we have our own in the Mormon Church, but rituals and so forth. And I think that those are those are things that can bind us to something that make us feel like we are integrated with something, that we have a um, more of a social purpose, that we belong somewhere. And ultimately, I guess now I believe we belong to ourselves, but we belong to each other. We're inextricably connected by that Big Bang. If everything came from a Big Bang, then we are all um, particles that are um, mixed with one another. So that you could take a particle and put it at one end of the universe, and from a quantum physics perspective, whatever you're doing to the one particle, half the particle over here, it's happening at the same time across the universe. That made sense to me. Those kinds of concepts that I didn't even know about until I was older, the quantum mechanics, quantum physics, those things made so much sense to me because they brought into reality like I've always believed in love and magic. And I would never let anybody tell me or destroy that part of me, a fundamental belief in magic and in love. And I realized that the the mechanisms that make that love and magic are things like quantum mechanics, things you can't explain until they come into fruition, until they come into reality. And we're here to learn, and that process will thankfully never end. Um, anyway, let's see. Trying to think about. Oh, you know what? So when I had all this anger after I got back from my mission, a lot of anger towards the church, a lot of anger just in general, and it seemed like that was the only emotion I could express. And I think that's one of the only approved expressions that men have, which I think is really sad because we are. I think that men are more emotional than women are. I think that women have the capacity to detach from things emotionally. That's why they can go through childbirth. They can detach from it, and then certainly they're better at arguments, because they can detach from it emotionally, and they'll win. Because men tend to be, fight or flight. We'll either fight the person or we'll just run away, and there's no in between. So we take everything as either an affront, or you better, as long as you agree with me, everything's gonna be great. Um, I have fantastic relationships with my straight friends, and I think that there's a real magic that's there between. And I really think a lot of gay people um, can miss out on these relationships that are very fulfilling with straight guys, because a lot of them they just want to have sex with them or end up having sex with them because they're attracted to them. But the problem with that is that it takes it to a carnal level. It doesn't respect the individual and elevate it to a spiritual. I don't know. It's like the relationship that you get with somebody you really truly respect, and you both walk away edified for having spent time with each other. That's that's everything. It's You want that in every relationship. And I found that I have more hilarious interactions with my straight guy friends, than I could have ever anticipated. Um, and it comes back down to just a respect. And um, I've had success in my life. What I would, in my own mind, call success. I've had success in my business, working for myself. I never thought I'd work for myself, and I honestly didn't. I mean, I had experience with corporations. I worked for Bechtel, and I worked for Ziff Davis, and a few other places like that. And I really enjoyed brand and market services. I gravitated towards that because I really felt like that. Um, the soul of a brand, which was someone's purpose for creating the company or starting the company, really, that was a spiritual part of it. And um, I wanted to help find the essence of that with mom and pop businesses. I started my business after the dot-com crash. There were no jobs. I had one interview in 3 years, and the most they were going to pay me was, I think it was 85,000, and I'd have to commute 4 hours a day in the Bay Area. And I just thought, that's just not worth it. I'd rather work for myself. And if I only made so much money, then fine, it'll still cover the bills. And I took a chance, and uh, the universe sort of brought people to me, that brought projects to me, and I would take on different projects, um, and take the risk towards that because it was a skill I could learn, or and then I could, offer to other clients in the future. I love steep learning curves, and that was one way that I could um, practice also using one of my gifts, which is being empathic. And when I met with the clients directly, I could feel what they wanted the customer experience to be, and I was able to understand what they wanted their website or whatever it was I was creating for them, what they wanted it to evoke in the user online. Typically, I make websites, website design and development, but I knew when I nailed it graphically, because I knew which one they would choose. I had to always create three different versions of something, but I already knew which one they were going to go for. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the challenge. I enjoyed taking on jobs I didn't know what the heck I was going to do or how I was going to accomplish it. If it was really too hard, I would outsource it and subcontract it. And that was another beautiful thing. But I did a lot of diverse things. We did film documentaries. There was a Japanese bilingual bicultural project a friend of mine was involved in, and she asked us to make a documentary on the 30th anniversary of that. And it was born from the concentration camps that we put the Japanese through in World War II, which is really unfortunate. We did some horrible things, but born from that was this program that from K through 6 teaches Japanese language and writing skills. And most of the kids that are in these classes are not Japanese. They're white, brown, you name it, black. And they're all speaking Japanese. They're all fluently writing Japanese, and it's truly an amazing thing to witness. And they become the national model actually for through six language. Anyway, that's I was just trying to show you some of the diversity out of in the projects that I would take on. I became a software application developer. I didn't even know what that meant, but I knew I had a friend that was he had Cityscape Property Management. He'd gone on his own with some partners, and we did their website. And then I noticed that I would take notes for their homeowners associations meetings, and I developed some software that managed their homeowners associations and brought a sense of community to those places. And I never thought I'd do that. But it was just exciting. And it was taking risks towards yourself. There'll always be payoff. I think that um, uh, I kind of I go back to this Indiana Jones Temple of Doom moment where he has to walk off the cliff in order for the pathway to appear. And it's only at that point of no return that that pathway will appear. That's kind of how it works here, is that I reach the precipice, and every time I reach that precipice, I know I'm going to run and jump off because I'm taking a risk towards myself and towards understanding and um, towards myself, really, towards understanding everything better, whether it's in business or in personal. Taking that running jump off the cliff towards the unknown is exciting. That's it keeps you young. It keeps you because every time you go there, it's not like it gets easier every time. It's just there's a moment you pause and you're like, okay, I'm here now. I see the abyss. I'm just gonna take the leap of faith, and it's amazing how the universe shifts things, and it's like all the cogs and wheels suddenly shift and work differently the moment you make a different decision than what you have before. There's so many times in my life where I've made the same decision over and over again because I was afraid of it, of the outcome, even if it was positive for me. I was a great self-sabotager. Um, I just, as soon as things were going too well, I knew I had to screw it up because I never had a sense of consistency, a sense of, what normalcy was. There was never a benchmark for me. But eventually, I've been able to find that place and that peace. But I really kind of still revel in the taking of risk, um, and that includes evolving myself spiritually. I think strangely, I think some of the most challenging moments I've had is when I consider the church again, when I consider my experience with the church and how I loved it. I loved being a part of it. And it was so hard for me to not be a part of that anymore. I felt personally just anguish. I went through an anguish and a sense of mourning after I left the church. And like had said before, there was a lot of anger that I needed to resolve. And what it came down to was understanding that I was in charge of my destiny, and I needed to find out what the truth was for me, aside from the church and aside from what may or may not happen hereafter or what happened before. Those things I can't control, but if you believe that, the past, present, and future are happening at the same time, then it doesn't really matter. um, but that there's I don't know, it's hard to explain, but the most challenging and evolving I've been doing is actually reconciling my relationship with the church, and part of that has been with their policies on gays and lesbians. And like I said, I wrote this book. It was just I photocopied the letters back and forth to the first presidency. I felt that was stronger than if I just wrote a book and interpreted our, the correspondences, because I wasn't hiding anything. And eventually, even though I was excommunicated and I didn't have the priesthood anymore, all this sort of stuff, um, they still encouraged me to pay my tithes and offerings. So I thought it was a little a little odd that you know I was not I mean I was not acknowledged as a person so much anymore. I wasn't part of the church as much as anymore, but they would still encourage me to give them a tenth of my income. Um, so I felt like that the message of that and in the book would be enough, with especially with all the information that I had at my fingertips. My father had a vast church library. You know, my adopted family's name is Ogden, as in Ogden, Utah. It was named after our family. Peter Steen Ogden was a fur trapper there, and it was named after him. But that's my adopted family. But uh, I enjoyed that heritage. No one gets my name spelled wrong when I'm in Utah. Um, anyway, um, I'm not sure what else I can tell you about my experience other than there's a couple of authors I could suggest that really helped me in my darkest hours, and that would be Carolyn Mace, MYSS, and she is a medical intuitive. And I remember PBS was doing a you know, one of their their annual fundraisers, and they were playing some of her videos on the web, and so I was watching these, and I just remember the things that she said as striking me as like she was unapologetic about and just brutal when it came down to, look, this is what's true, this is what you're dealing with, and don't pretend it's something else. And she wouldn't let me get away, have any squeeze room whatsoever. It was just uncomfortable things that I enjoyed being uncomfortable with because he challenged me and made me think about things differently. She says that our biography becomes our biology. How we live our life is manifest in our body. And what her job was is to identify where people are losing their personal power in their lives. She talks about like uh, imagine $100 worth of spirituality coming or light coming into your body every day. Anything you say that's a negative, anything that you're criticizing others, or if you're going back to your past, every time you do that, you're taking $10 away. And she says, by the end of the day, we're all running up a deficit. And she says, eventually you've got to pay for that. And where do you think it gets paid for? It gets paid for by your cells, the actual cells in your body. So I found that interesting, and some of the her positions on things, archetypes, and how you fit into that. I guess you'd call me the wounded healer, because I was an LMT and I enjoyed uh, envisioning the healing power coming through me through my hands and really healing someone's body. And I would just let my hands go and it'd be directed where to go and where and what to do, what method to use. My birth grandmother was a noted acupuncturist and massage therapist. She was sought by a lot of celebrities in Los Angeles. She was one of a very few women that were allowed.
I lost
I
you.
didn't have a lot of
Okay.
time with her, but anyway, um, what you looked like you were about to say something.
Just that your audio cut out for just a second, so you're
Oh,
good
I'm
now.
sorry.
Go ahead. Just a glitch.
Okay,
You're doing great, Stephen. Keep sharing.
okay. So Brene Brown is probably the other one that I really gravitated towards. I was reading her book about the power of vulnerability, and that she says it's like it's the birthplace of true innovation and creativity. I always knew that, being a composer producer, because that's the most vulnerable thing you can do is put something out there that didn't exist before. But in my mind, I hear finished works. So I do believe that those things are already written. We have to be worthy to receive them. But she talks about being a wholehearted person. And I never knew what that meant. I always thought there was something wrong with me because I'd always engaged people emotionally. And then I'd find myself getting exploited or taken advantage of. So I thought there was something wrong with me. And I realized that in her book that I was a wholehearted person. I was willing to take the risk and say I love you first. I was willing to invest time and energy into other people, even if it didn't have a payoff. Um, and my father's parents were probably the most wholehearted people I'd ever known, and I let that inspire me to to figure out what that meant and to have to learn how to protect myself. The gifts that we're all given different gifts in this life, and gifts can be, they're like double-edged swords. They can. When I was younger, I didn't understand what those gifts, what purpose they served, other than they frustrated me. But as I got older and as I was able to understand that these gifts um, are double-edged swords, but you can, if you use them wisely and to help other people, because it's not always about you. If you use them wisely to help others, that then there is a blessing for having that gift, um, because you see that manifest in somebody else in the positive outcomes. Um, like I said before, in my business, I was able to connect with my clients and understand on an empathic level what they were looking for. That wasn't so much fun when I was a kid. I could tell you when I was in the shopping cart, sitting in the shopping cart, I could go down the line and tell you the sorrows of every person in line. Like, I was the Vietnam War was going on, and I said, she just lost her son in the Vietnam War. This guy's cashing his last paycheck. He doesn't know what he's going to do after that. And I just go down the line, and I would take on that suffering automatically as a kid because I wouldn't want them to suffer. So I started to take those things on, and so it became a part of. Every once in a while, I'd have to exercise those demons. They weren't mine. They weren't my sorrows, but I had to get rid of them out of me, and I would often end up, you know, uh, acting out or misbehaving, and I didn't know why. My father would ask me, "Why did you do that?" And I had to have no explanation for him. I said, "I don't know. I just did it." And I realized that later on that was what that was me getting rid of these of having taken on the suffering of others, and I learned how to set boundaries and exercise a little bit of distance, still engage, but not 100%. Um, I started taking Prozac at one point because it gave me the option to say, well, I'm going to choose to feel something about that on Thursday and not deal with that now. The problem, and over time, I realized, okay, I still need to have access to my emotional. I want to be able to cry when I feel, so moved, and I felt like Prozac got in the way, so I stopped taking that, and because I gained an understanding and an appreciation of it, and developed my skill of self mastery to try and practice not engaging emotionally all the time, but at the same time now I don't need the Prozac because it helped me see how I could get there. And sometimes I think that that's what these medications are for. I mean, they used to have me on all sorts of medications, and it really wasn't until I got rid of the medications and decided I needed to face my how I functioned. Like, what is it that, where are my triggers? What starts this manic depressive stuff going on? And so I started to watch myself and watch the cycles and then started to act differently. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't recognize those things when I was on the medication. So, because they cover up the symptoms. So it was difficult for me to identify when those cycles began. I'm not suggesting people stop taking their medications at all. I think that you have to work with a doctor that listens to you and understands you and practice those things safely. But for me, I'm a kind of a balls to the wall kind of guy. You know, I'll just do it. I'll just try it. People will say, "Oh, you can't do that cold turkey," and I'll say, "Watch me," because I knew what I was capable of, and I never questioned that part of me. I don't know where that comes from, other than I'm belligerently myself. And when I met my birth mother, and yeah, I know where it comes from. My mother's a ball of fire, and the more I spend time with her, the more I understand myself. Um, we really, it was really a miracle that brought us together. I had almost run into her on my mission. I was in the Alhambra mission, and she lived in Alhambra at the time I was a missionary. I could have run into her then. I actually was starting to look for her. I'd copied all the triers out of the California yellow or the white pages, and she was on page 3, and I got into 1.5. And so there was different times in my life where I attempted to look for her. I even went so far as to hire somebody to look for her, and then I had an emotional breakdown at the bar. I didn't know why I couldn't stop crying, and I realized I'd touched something so deep in me it that it was um, it wasn't the right time yet, and was in a 10-year relationship that I needed to end, and it was almost immediately after that that I got a call from my adopted mother saying that these producers wanted me to be on television, and I thought, oh, perfect, here's my calling. And I didn't know who it was. The basis of the show was that someone from your past wants to be reunited with you, and you don't know who it is. And then they film you um, watching this video of them talking to you and wanting to be reunited, and you can choose to be reunited with them or not. If you choose to be reunited, then you can choose someone to be reunited with of your own, and it goes on down the line. That was the basis of the show, so it's kind of a pay it forward thing. And we were the pilot for this series. It wasn't a long running series at all, but it was enough for me and my mom to meet, and that was it. Just fundamentally shifted my whole life. Um, I was worried she was going to approve of me being gay, and she's like, "Oh, thank God! I thought you were going to be Republican." And I said, "No, no, no harm in that. No possibility of that happening." But I anyway, it was a wonderful meeting. We hugged for about a half an hour, and they couldn't pull us apart. And I think we were both worried uh, we didn't want to lose each other at that point. But she gave me the the very things that I needed to be able to be independent and to love myself and to look out for myself and I think if I had I I'd had a struggles with suicide when I was younger, of course, because of the church's stance on things, and I realized that I was like, well, how is it that the very God who made me as I am is sending me to hell for how he made me? Why would that make any sense? And then if that's the case, then why should I even worry about struggling with this life? There were two boys that were in my high school that they were discovered. They were gay. He was the head of the baseball team, and the shortstop, his best friend since they were kids. They had a relationship there until his ex his girlfriend's friend, she caught them uh, while they were having sex once, and so they ended up shooting themselves in the head and killed themselves. I sang at one of their funerals, and I just thought it was so unfair for them to feel like they had no alternative and nowhere to go, nowhere that it was hopeless, and that they took their own lives. And though I struggled with the idea of that, um, I realized that at the end of the day, I would rather. Why did they get to win? Why did they get to win? And and why should I give up? I'm going to show them. I'm going to embrace who I am. And even if I'm just running, if I end up going to hell, I'm not going to pretend to be in love with a woman. I'm not going to have kids and possibly screw up their lives. I'll only screw up my life at least. And that was, gosh, I've never been happier since I embraced that. And I'm glad that I didn't give up and that I had that fighter within me. Not everybody has the same fighter within them, and some, you know, I'm surprised at how many have given up that fight before they had the chance to taste what it feels like to come out the other side. There's a point in my life where had just broken up my 10-year relationship, and I had a kind of a vision where I saw myself on the other side of a tunnel, and I looked at this person. It was me. And then I got to jump from that present body into the mind and body of the other person at the other side of the tunnel for just a few seconds. And the experience that I had inside that other body and the mind and everything that that person had, the wisdom and the understanding and everything that this person had, I wanted it so bad that it didn't matter to me what was going to happen after that. I knew my life would go down the toilet. I knew I'd lose everything. I knew my whole life was going to shift. And I just resigned myself to it because of being able to be in that other body and that other mind for just a few seconds. And since I've come up here to Missoula and stayed in Montana, um, I know now that I am that person on the other side, and that I'm constantly, you know, evolving continuously. I'm trying to continue to grow. Um, uh, and my relationship with my partner has been going on 8 years now. It's very rewarding and challenging, but fun. At just we're having a good time. We're enjoying life, and I kind of think that's what i- that's one of the things I never understood why the church wouldn't want me to have. That is have a relationship with someone else that I really loved, because I think that's one of the higher you don't reach the higher concepts or precepts, until you have someone like that you can share that love with. Because I'll tell you, it's not about sex. It's about spiritual connection. It's about understanding that, gosh, you love this person so much, but it requires that you know yourself well enough to not lose yourself to that other person. Re, you know Retaining your sense of autonomy, but at the same time you'd sacrifice everything for this other person. Understanding what that means, and um, just the nuances that are involved in when you have a relationship like that are just important for everyone to be able to enjoy. I never understood the a concept of, you can be gay, but you just can't practice it. I never understood that. I felt like that everybody got a Ferrari, but you don't get to have the set of keys to yours. um, anyway, I could talk your ear off, but that's that's a little bit of my background, my experience.
Stephen, thank you. I'm still going to let you keep talking, but
Okay,
let me just make some comments, and maybe we'll turn it back
sure.
to you for some closing thoughts. But I wrote some things down, listeners. You listeners that are regular listeners know that I do this. I wrote down 4 things with big stars, and you probably wrote down other things as Steve shared his story. I loved your idea. I'm in charge of my own destiny. That is our theology. That is the agency we talk about. And I love that at some point you said, I have to be in charge of my own destiny and own that. You're the next thing I wrote down is you're the first guest that's ever talked about, castration and actually considered that. And I think that helps us understand where you were and everything you were doing to be straight, your mission, all that you were doing, and even willing to consider castration if that made you straight. Glad that didn't happen, but I think it just helps us understand where you were and all you were doing to be straight and realize that wasn't possible. Thank you for serving a mission, and thank you for being alive. And just that long, painful journey of trying to be straight. I love the wounded healer. You mentioned that. It's a Henry Norman talks about the wounded healer, and I read this, but this is kind of who you are, Stephen. A minister service, that's you, Stephen, will not be perceived as authentic unless it comes from a heart wounded by the suffering about which he speaks. The great illusion of leadership is to think others can be led of a desert by someone who's never been there. So you are a wounded healer, Stephen, and you know the desert of being gay in a church that doesn't make space for that, working through mental health issues, being adopted and working through, difficult relationship with your father. And so you've been really wounded as part of mortality. But you are in such a great spot that you give hope and healing, and you're helping people by being on this podcast. And I bet you've helped a lot of people in your life. Then you said something pretty profound. Why would a God who made me as I am, meaning gay, send me to hell for being me? Wow, what a good theological question that I don't have an answer to. I hope we get better answers. You've got your own answer to that. I think that God's not going to send you to hell. This is who I am, and I'm, in charge of my own destiny and charting my own future. our church, as you may know, kind of talks about being the author of our own story. That's a kind of a new thing, Stephen, that's been in our, but it doesn't really create space for your own story to take you outside of church teachings. But it is, I do agree that what you've done is you've authored your own story. You've said, I've got to own my destiny. Obviously, it's really complex being gay and Mormon, and that's not going to work for me because I can't unbe gay. So I can't really find a place in my church, and I'm going to make my way forward. And so I think you've done a terrific job of authoring your own story without much of an owner's manual, except your heart and your spirit. Also recognize the sacrifice you made to not be Mormon, because you needed to not be Mormon to be able to make your way forward. All the music skills you have and all the chances you had to perform and feel the support of your Mormon community. And there's a cost to that. Some of my friends call it a double bind. They want to be able to live their life and they'd love to be in the church, but you're in this double bind where you can't do both. And so you made your way forward, but at great cost. And then we sometimes, if I had gotten an email 10 years ago from a gay ex-Mormon, I wouldn't have responded to that email. I would have thought, well, my job is to never talk to you, Stephen, or, run. And now I've just recognized that you're my spiritual brother, Stephen. You chose the same plan in the pre-earth life. We have the same heavenly parents. And so, I just see you that way. I don't see you, you're not in the church, but I don't see you that way. I see you as someone doing the very best you can with what you're given. And you're a hero in many ways for being alive, finding peace in your life, having a companion, reuniting with your biological mother, finding peace in your life. And it's a beautiful love story with a lot of complicated chapters that you've navigated the best way you could. The God I believe in, Stephen, would just give you a hug and say, you've done the best you can. I love you. You're right. You're gay. You can't change that. Yeah, I made you gay. I really believe that, listeners. Everybody needs to look in the mirror and think they're created as intended, straight or gay or trans. No one can look in the mirror and think they're a mistake. That takes us to a really bad spot that you've walked. So you're a good
Well,
man, Stephen. And I'll turn it back
if
to
I
you
could,
for more
thank
comments.
you. I appreciate that. I would say that I appreciate what you're saying, and I don't. I guess I kind of think like I look for the similarities in all of us and try to um, not. I don't really think about what I've been through to get here so much as I think about. It's like what's the American story? The American story is, well, you've had all these things happen to you, but just what did you do despite that? What have you done after that? You could be a victim of anything. But what did you do after that? Because I think there's a lot of
Wow.
boondology speak in our nation right now, in the world, where people talk about, well, I was a victim of abuse, blah 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 blah, and yet it seems manipulative to some degree because it's like, well, why would you tell me that? Um, First out, like just right out of the race, out of the starting gate, because like you didn't mention it before, and is that something I'm supposed to connect with you on, or just have to honor that versus what did you do after that, or what did you do despite that happening to you? I think that's the American story, not I got wounded. Who's got the most wounds? And it has become a form of commerce, really in our society. And I think that's you can get caught up in that suffering versus um, what you're meant to do, which is and part of the healing phase is a narcissistic phase where you have to worry about yourself, blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, uh, the highest calling is to be of service to others, and that requires you to be 100% clear on all this stuff. I could not be an LMT and expect to heal anybody if I didn't have my stuff straight, if I didn't have myself figured out and had all those issues not necessarily resolved 100%, but just to the point where the light could go through me and help someone to heal. And at the end of the day, I want to be of service to others. That's the highest calling we can have. That requires us to get out of that narcissistic phase. I kind of think that since 9/11, we've kind of been doing this um, convoluted idea of moving forward, but we really quite haven't quite resolved it because we don't. It feels really good to be all about America, and I'm not going to get into politics, but um, ultimately, the microcosm is representative of the macrocosm. So everyone's dealing with the same kinds of things at the same time. And when we think about, well, we create our own destiny. Our destiny is something that we create. Fate is what happens to you when you don't do anything. I often think that some of the best advice I ever got was first believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. But also but also that uh, um, that when it comes down to it, you forging your own path ahead requires you to be absolutely vulnerable with who you are. Put everything up on the sacrificial table. You can't help anybody else until you've realized what that means to help yourself or to have something to be able to give. If you don't love yourself, how are you going to love anybody else? That's what RuPaul says, and it's really true. But but and what does that mean in practical terms? It's different for everybody. Ultimately, I think though that if we give uh, others the opportunity to connect with us and to share our vulnerabilities with each other and realize that we're all part of the same whether it's a um, earth school. I've heard it called earth school. There's a guy who had died for over an hour and a half. He came back and talked about his experience, his near-death experience. I had friends that had died several times. My friend Keith, he had a congenital heart problem, and he died finally at age 18, but he died probably about 5 times. And he was telling me that he was never afraid of life, never afraid of death, because he understood what happened after that. And just him telling me about his experience, that it was, it's impossible that he memorized the doctor's name that was operating on his heart. This doctor had come and gone before he was back alive. Um, uh, this guy who died for over an hour and a half, he came back completely healed, completely 100%. And it was his near-death experience that I found very moving because it was so similar to what the church teaches. There were so many similarities. And one of the things that was the most important, his spirit guide was named Drake, and Drake asked him, "What do you think is the most important concept in the universe?" And he's like, "Oh, well, you're gonna say love." And he goes, "Well, that's important, but that's not the most important." He said, "The most important thing is to be authentic. Authenticity is what's most important, and that children and old people are basically at that authentic place. Older people because they just don't care anymore. They let go of it, and they're not going to they're just going to be who they are, and they're not going to make any apologies anymore. And kids because they're still connected with that magnanimous source, and they don't have a filter on them. So being authentic and saying and being who you really are, even if it's hurtful sometimes, it's better to know it gives you more of an understanding of somebody. We all put on different masks, I suppose, and how we present ourselves to people. I found that the thing that resonates and cuts through any of the small talk or whatever, if I really want to connect with a person, I listen to them, and I listen for things that I can connect with them, and maybe even things that I don't agree with them. I can engage them in conversation that's very meaningful and walk away edified. Both of you are edified for having spent that time when I reach out and just allow them to talk to me. And I really listen, not think about what I'm going to say next, but really listen to them and try to feel what they were feeling and what their struggles have been. And it's not about just the struggle part too. I'm fascinated with how people got to where they are, and who they are. It's always a struggle to get to that point. If it wasn't, then I mean, when that was another concept that this guy who died for an hour and a half talks about. He says, when you're around the source, you only want to do what the source wants you to do. There was no choice. So coming to Earth School, there were people who volunteered to be bad guys, people who volunteered to be the opposite of good, so that they could, well, I don't believe in evil or good. I just believe there are there are outcomes, to certain things. And whether those outcomes pay off for you, or you find them a benefit, then that's how you interpret it. But ultimately, and for the example I'm talking about, it was that we didn't have a choice before it became here. So having that choice of choosing either to follow one direction or the other gives us it opens up a whole school of concepts, precepts that really, uh, when you put them into practice, are pretty amazing. And you know, there's several times in my life where I go, gosh, well, I'm sure glad I had this honesty thing figured out. And then you'll get a little more humbled by some event that'll happen, and where it causes you to go, okay, I don't have any clue what I'm talking about. I need to, there's so many nuances and precepts to learning how many steps there are. There's like a million steps with humility. There's a million steps with every single one of these things, but you can't see uh, these other levels until you do the work to get you up to that point. um, we're all trying to get, as Carolyn Mace talks about, we're all in an apartment building, and some people live on the first floor. They're just fine with that. They have their view and everything else. But she's like, I always want the penthouse, because then I can see everything and understand everything. I can see everything. And your scope changes, your perspective changes, and the capacity, like the potential, um, where particles can be in over 3,500 places at once at the same time, until you look at it. And it is in that conscious looking at it, I kind of think about the decisions that we make. When you decide on the one choice, then everything else flows into place. And it's about finding out which perspective you're going to learn the most from, which one to um, we kind of all go through a dark night of the soul. A lot of the Catholic saints, mystics, talk about that dark night of the soul, and that's really where, like, you'll be at a point in your life where you're trying to do the same things that had worked up until that point, and no matter what you do, nothing seems to work out correctly. You can't find direction. You feel lost, and it is when you know that's what you're going through that you are helped the most. Because if you know you're going through the dark night of the soul, and that you're not able to navigate forward, like the things that used to work don't work anymore, when you embrace those things completely, when you embrace loss completely, when you embrace guilt, when you embrace anything in life 100%, the most uncomfortable parts of that will happen. And if you just embrace it, you get through it faster than if you push it away from you, or when you try to suppress it, because it will eventually come out anyway. So face it head on and embrace what that is, for everything that it is, and everything that you had no idea it was going to be. You don't get to decide how long it takes to get through that. And there are some things in my life, like I was saying, it probably took me about a good 7 years, since the time I left Los Angeles to the time I came up here to Montana, for me to sort things out and have the time to put into practice being first responsible to myself, and keeping my own word to myself. If I can't do that, I there's no way I could keep my word to someone else. So that's what I started to practice. And when I felt that I could, that I got that down, then I could start, taking baby steps, and I could take on a part-time job, or being responsible to someone else, and see how that feels. And just, it's kind of like starting to walk all over again. But it was really putting aside who I thought who it was I thought I was and what I needed to do in my life. I read a book that said nothing special. It's called Nothing Special, and it's a Zen concept of you don't have to be someone special. You don't have to do all these magnanimous things. I always felt like I needed to be like I was meant to be a celebrity or I was meant to be a notable person, and I had pursuits in music that I wanted, and I've worked with a lot of famous people. I did a movie with Francis Ford Coppola in my high school. Peggy Sue Got Married. I was on the crew. I was also in the cast, and it was because I was studying to go to the American Film Institute in Los Angeles, and I knew everything about the different directors, and I saw this fat Italian guy walking through our high school, and I said that looks a lot like Francis Ford Coppola. If there's a green Rolls Royce out front, then I knew it was him. So I ran and I went and looked, and sure enough, there's a green Rolls Royce. So I started running down the hallway at him, saying, waving my arms, going, "Mr. Coppola, Mr. Coppola," and the people that were with him sort of encircled him to protect him from me. And he goes, "Yes, what can I do for you?" And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to make a film here. Is that all right with you?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to be involved." And he's like, "All right, well, we'll give you a call over the summer and we'll get you involved." And that was when he asked if I wanted to make a film documentary of the making of Peggy Sue Got Married. I'd be the only camera allowed on the set. I could film anything I wanted to as long as they weren't filming. And I met and worked with Kathleen Turner, Nicolas Cage, Joan Allen, Jim Carrey, um, people who were in the beginning of their careers. Except for Kathleen Turner, she was probably my most enjoyable relationship because she was so real. She had just come from the Jewel of the Nile fame, and I mean Prizzi's Honor, and all these great films. She really connected with me. At first we were she was kind of ticked off at me because I was trying to get video footage of her without her seeing me, and nothing escapes her. So she'd give me these bad looks, and finally Joan Allen and I had struck up a friendship on the set, and she's like, "I think it's time for you to meet Kathleen because she is not happy with you." So as soon as she saw me, she's like, "You're that kid. What are you doing with the camera?" And then she's like, "Well, Francis told us about Stephen, and he's going to be doing a film documentary." "Oh, okay. Well, you're not off the hook. I want you to bring me breakfast every morning by 7 a.m. sharp, and don't you be late." So I got to bring her breakfast every morning at 7 a.m. I was there by 6, of course, just to make sure I didn't screw it up and be late. But then we were also in different scenes together, and I just remember her, you know, just being real with me. Just she'd see me on the set and she'd go, "Oh, Stephen, oh, it's so good to see you." And she'd tell me about how her husband's coming into town and all this stuff. And she was just excited. And she was sharing all this stuff. And I'm this little Mormon kid in high school going, "Oh my gosh." Is she trying to corrupt me? Because she had language about her. She was a very body, this puts it all out there, but she was so genuine and loving. And I'll tell you, when I met Francis Ford Coppola, um, I was able to interview him, and it was really there's certain people I've met in my life who embody the spirit of what it is they do. I was My first producer was David Freiberg for Jefferson Airplane, and when I met him and when I met Francis Ford Coppola, same concept. It just washed over me, this sense of this person embodies the spirit of what they do. And Francis Ford Coppola to this day knows who I am. And he asked me a few years ago when I asked if I could redo the making of Peggy Sue Got Married, because I did a high school job of it. His assistant came back at me and she says, "Mr. Coppola would like to know what you've done with your music." Because he remembered that I was a composer, and his father, Carmine Coppola, was a composer, and he loved his father very much. And I was so touched that he remembered me of all people, that he was he the humility that he carried with him, and the solicitation of our ideas. We were on the set one day, and we were having problems with Kathleen and I bumping into each other in this scene. The bell rings, and I'm supposed to get out of there. Well, we kept running into each other, and they were trying to figure out what to do. And I said, "Well, I have a suggestion." And he goes, "Stephen, what do you think we should do?" I said, "Well, I think I'm not really important to this scene, and she's contemplating how she's going to approach the English teacher about this question and this concept." And so I'll get up and get out, and then that way she's still sitting there, and we're not bumping into each other, and it should flow better. he says, "Great, let's do it," and that's how they left it in the film. And I was so touched by that, by him doing that. I mean, I'm nobody, and here I am suggesting to a world famous director what I think could work. But I love film, and I loved his films so much, and certainly his films more than any others have touched me and shaped me. The Outsiders, another great classic. I felt like an outsider being gay, and the relationship between Ponyboy and Johnny was it was very much a gay relationship. I mean, it was just it felt so much like they really loved and looked out for each other, and that was the first representation I'd seen in American cinema that allowed me to feel like I was not an outsider anymore. I could be an insider. I could be part of a group, part of it. I could belong somewhere. And anyway, back to the humility thing I felt with Francis Ford Coppola. I also felt with David Freiberg when I walked into his studio and he we talked for the first time. I just knew that he embodied music, the spirit of music. And this is a guy who, when I walked into the studio another time, he's on the phone with Jerry Garcia. And he was like, "All right, Jerry, I'll talk to you later." And I said, "That wasn't Jerry Garcia, was it?" He goes, "Yeah, Jerry and I go way back." And there's all these gold and silver and platinum records all over the house, and there's a big, huge, long picture of all of the bands that participated in the Haight Ashbury event. And it was because of David actually that I can't remember her name all of a sudden. Why can't I remember? Because I'm trying to remember her name. That's why. Um, Janis Joplin. That's why she was actually playing, or she played that concert was because she was staying at David's house that night. David had gotten extradited from Mexico because of some visa mix-up, and she called, and she and her manager, were just going to stay at a hotel. He said, "Oh, come stay with us." So she stayed with him, and they talked about, "Oh, what are you doing tomorrow?" "Oh, well, we're going to do a concert. You want to join in?" And she thought it was great, so she did. And it was just like, wow, you see these people and you see all the bands that they played with that day, and it just you're like, is that? And he's like, "Yep, that's that." And is that? Oh my gosh! So he really knows everybody's anybody, and he I apprenticed with him for 7 years until I opened up my own studio in Green Bay, California, and it was called Aureus Music. Aureus means gold in Latin. And I just remember how he taught me to approach everything. The concept is not when you're recording, don't screw with it too much. Don't touch it too much because it'll be contrived. And when something's contrived, it's dishonest. And it comes back down to honesty. And it's that one thing that resonates more in my life over and over again is that the more authentic or honest I am, the more I can cultivate that in the relationships that I have with others. And the more I can be self-effacing and really challenge myself to be even more honest and vulnerable, the greater the resonance and the greater effect I can have positively on other people's lives. There are times where I'll be talking to someone, listening to what there is beleaguering them, whatever they're going through, and somehow when I'm talking to them, the something to say comes right through me, and I won't understand what I'm saying until the moment I say it, um, and it will be what they needed to hear, and I'll be like, "Oh, that is the answer." Where I hadn't really gotten to the point where there was an answer yet until someone else had a problem, and I could find the answer more easily with someone else. That's how the story of my life. Because it's hard to be objective about yourself. It's very, very difficult, and especially in music. But it also comes back down to problems. I find it easier to solve other people's problems rather than my own. But the one of the biggest concepts that I had mentioned earlier that I'd forgotten about was that there is no such thing as a wrong choice. You can't make a wrong choice other than not to make one, and that the universe, God, whatever the higher source or higher power. I really believe that actually each one of us we are our own God. We have that higher power within us, and that all the answers dwell within us since we were born to get through this life. Whatever we need in terms of answers, if we go inside rather than externalizing responsibility for that, for our lives, the decisions we make to others or other sources, go inside and you'll find the answers there. And you will always be directed the right way. Um, and I really believe that you can't make a wrong decision other than not to make one. I've made wrong ones, and then I made a different decision, and the cogs and wheels of the universe reorient, and somehow magically, um, I understand. My understanding opens up, and something works out. There's different things I struggled with since I was young, and each one of these I'm trying to identify and have it pan out. But I love the struggle of that. I love the difficulty of coming to understanding oneself. Um,
Stephen, I need to wrap up the podcast.
oh,
So
I'm sorry. Okay.
you're doing great, but
Um,
I just have a hard stop. So maybe you could just leave us
yeah.
with a closing
So
comment or two.
I would just so for anyone struggling with the coming out process or recognizing who it is you are or who you think you are, the most important thing you can be is honest with yourself and not be afraid of what others will say or do in response to that, because you're not responsible for what they think about you. That's not your job. Your job is to focus on yourself and have faith that the higher power or whatever so whatever source it is that you have given that to, that it will lead you the right direction, and that you just need to love yourself and be honest with yourself, be your authentic self. And it got me through all the darkest times of my life. And never give up. The smallest step and the smallest step towards your goal against all opposition is is stronger than the fiercest storm. Never give up. So that's what I would say.
That is powerful closing words. Thank you, Stephen Mark Trier, for being on the podcast. Thank
Thanks for
you.
having me.
Glad to have you. And this is Richard Osler signing off for another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.